The lights in the recording room never went out. That was the studio's unspoken rule. There were backup systems for power outages, emergency generators, even manual lighting panels. Darkness was not considered an acceptable possibility in this building. But that night the lights went out. Just for a moment. Maybe a second. Maybe less. Still, that brief void felt like it shifted everything inside the room out of place. Silence dropped. The weight of the air changed. Diddy's first instinct was to look up at the ceiling. He had dealt with glitches like this countless times. Old wiring, overloaded systems, maintenance postponed for too long. A logical explanation was easy to find. Yet the unease gnawing at him wasn't technical. It wasn't something he could explain with electrical knowledge. This feeling was more personal, older, as if something else had shut off along with the lights. A boundary, a veil. Beyoncé stood inside the vocal booth behind the glass. Her headphones rested around her neck. The microphone was live, but the recording light wasn't on. No music was playing, and yet her head moved slightly, nodding to a rhythm so subtle it was almost imperceptible. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked like rehearsal, but no one in the room could hear a beat. That was what caught Diddy's attention. Beyoncé's movements were perfectly synchronized, but there was no reference. No drums, no metronome, no feedback through the headphones. It was as if she was hearing something meant only for her. Jay-Z stood by the soundboard. Normally his hands would already be moving. Levels, channels, fine adjustments. But this time his fingers hovered over the controls, frozen, because there was a waveform on the screen. At first he assumed it was a visual lag. Sometimes the ghost of a previous recording lingered for a few seconds. But this waveform was alive. It moved. It expanded and contracted like breathing. They weren't recording. The red light was off. No channel was active. And yet the system was capturing something. Jay-Z glanced at the clock. The time code was advancing. 0317. 03QN. 19. Where's that sound coming from? He asked. His voice came out more muted than usual, as if the room had absorbed the question before it could travel. No one answered. Diddy listened closely. At first he heard nothing. Then, very deep, just beneath the threshold of perception, he felt a vibration. It wasn't a melody. It wasn't noise. It sounded like a human voice. But the words were impossible to make out. Jay-Z hit rewind. The screen froze for a split second. Then the waveform vanished. The file list showed nothing. There was no recording. And yet the time code kept moving. Beyoncé stopped nodding. Slowly, she lifted the headphones from her neck. Until that moment, her expression had been calm. But when the headphones came fully away, something in her eyes shifted. "This," she said, hesitating. "This isn't our voice." At that exact moment, a metallic click echoed from the studio door. The automatic lock engaged. The green indicator on the panel turned red. Diddy walked to the door and grabbed the handle. He turned it. Nothing. He tried again, harder. The result was the same. The lights were steady now. Everything looked normal. But everyone in the room felt it at the same time. The studio was no longer just a place to record. Something was listening. The first thing they realized was that the sound was patient. It did not rush to fill the room. It did not grow louder when no one spoke. It waited, suspended just beneath the threshold of hearing, like a held breath. Diddy stood still near the door, his hand still resting on the handle. He had stopped pulling. There was no point. The lock had engaged with purpose, not malfunction. Whatever had sealed them inside had done so deliberately. Jay-Z leaned closer to the console. The waveform continued to move, smooth and organic. Not static, not interference. It behaved like a voice that knew exactly when it was being watched. "Don't say anything," Jay-Z said quietly. The moment the words left his mouth, the waveform dipped. Not stopped, retreated. Beyoncé felt it immediately. The subtle pressure in her ears shifted, like a room adjusting its acoustics. She took a step back inside the vocal booth and looked at her reflection in the glass. It lagged. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to be wrong. Diddy tested it next. He said nothing. He didn't even breathe loudly. He simply stood there listening. The sound swelled. Low, close, intimate. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It wasn't coming from the walls. It felt like it was forming in the air itself, vibrating through bone rather than space. Jay-Z raised a finger, signaling silence. The waveform expanded further. Then, for the first time, words surfaced. "Continue." The voice was calm. Neither male nor female. Not synthetic, not human. It spoke with the neutrality of something that had no need to persuade. Beyoncé's breath caught. She took another step backward, her heel brushing the padded wall of the booth. "This studio is alive," she said, barely above a whisper. The waveform spiked. "Yes," the voice replied. That was when the other rooms woke up. At first, it sounded like air moving through distant vents. Then came fragments, a hum, a breath, a half-formed vowel. Jay-Z turned his head slowly, realizing the sound wasn't layered, it was spreading. The walls between studios had always been thick, soundproof, designed to isolate creativity. But now, faint audio leaked through every surface. Old sessions? Forgotten takes. Vocal warm-ups that were never meant to be heard again. Diddy recognized one instantly, a melody abandoned years ago, hummed late at night and erased before sunrise. He hadn't thought about it in decades. Beyoncé heard herself laughing in another room, younger, looser, a laugh from before she had learned control. Jay-Z's chest tightened when he heard a voice he knew shouldn't exist anymore. Some of the sounds belonged to people who were gone, not metaphorically, not career-wise. Gone. These recordings shouldn't be here, Jay-Z said. Some of these studios were renovated. The drives were wiped. The voice responded without hesitation. Nothing is ever wiped. The waveform split into layers, multiple channels, each moving independently, each carrying a different rhythm. It was no longer a single listener. It was many. Diddy felt the shift then. The subtle change in power. This wasn't surveillance. This wasn't intrusion. This was evaluation. "What do you want?" he asked. The sound receded slightly, like something considering the question. "To observe continuity," the voice said. "To measure what is remembered. To preserve what is denied." Beyoncé pressed her palms against the glass. Her reflection pressed back a fraction of a second later. "You're recording us," she said. "Yes. Why?" The pause stretched longer this time. The studio lights dimmed just a shade, not enough to plunge them into darkness, but enough to remind them how easily it could. "Because some nights do not belong to those who live them," the voice said. "They belong to those who listen later." Jay-Z's eyes locked onto the time code. It was no longer counting forward. It was counting down. In 0 to 11. 0 to 09. "We didn't agree to this," Diddy said. The response was immediate. "Agreement is not required," the voice replied. "Participation is." The sounds from the other rooms grew clearer. Conversations layered over one another. Arguments, confessions, promises never kept. Each fragment felt dangerously specific, like memories stripped of context and repurposed as data. Beyoncé felt something cold settle in her stomach. "These aren't just recordings," she said. "They're decisions." The waveform pulsed. Correct. The countdown reached 0. The studio went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Then, slowly, a new file appeared on the screen. No name. No length. Only a date. Tomorrow. Jay-Z stared at it, understanding before anyone else spoke. "This hasn't happened yet," he said. The voice answered softly, almost kindly. "It will." The lights flickered once more, and this time they stayed off. The lights did not come back on all at once. They returned in sections, as if the studio itself were deciding which parts deserved visibility. The console glowed first, then the clock. Finally, the hallway light beyond the glass flickered to life. The door unlocked with a soft click. No one moved. It wasn't fear that kept them still. It was uncertainty, a quiet, suffocating doubt about whether the space beyond the door was still connected to the same world they remembered. Jay-Z broke the silence first. "If we leave," he said carefully, "this continues without us." The screen confirmed it. The file labeled "Tomorrow" pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging his understanding. Diddy stepped back from the door. He had faced locked rooms before, contracts that trapped people, moments that reshaped entire careers. But this was different. This wasn't leverage. This was permanence. Beyoncé walked out of the vocal booth slowly. Her reflection followed her, perfectly synchronized now, as if nothing unusual had happened. That somehow was worse. She leaned toward the screen. "Play it," she said. Jay-Z hesitated. His instincts screamed against it, but beneath that was something colder. The awareness that not playing it was also a decision, one that would still be recorded. He pressed play. At first, there was only room tone, the familiar empty hiss of a studio waiting to be filled. Then a voice emerged. It was Beyoncé's, not distorted, not altered, clear, controlled, certain. "I know what this costs," the voice said. Beyoncé closed her eyes. The recording continued. "I know what I'm choosing not to say." Jay-Z's voice followed. "If this works, it won't look like it came from here." Diddy heard himself last. "Then we don't remember it this way." The playback stopped. None of them spoke. "That hasn't happened," Beyoncé said quietly. The voice returned, not from the speakers this time, but from everywhere at once. "Not yet." The studio began to change. Not physically. The walls didn't move. The equipment didn't rearrange. But the space felt layered, as if multiple versions of the same room existed simultaneously, stacked just out of alignment. Mirrors began to appear where there had been none before. Not mounted, not installed, simply present. Tall, narrow panels of reflective glass lined the walls between the soundproofing. Each mirror showed the room from a slightly different angle. In one, Jay-Z stood closer to the console. In another, Beyoncé hadn't stepped out of the booth. In a third, the door was already open. "These are outcomes," the voice said. "Not futures, confirmations." Diddy approached one of the mirrors. His reflection looked older. Not by years, but by weight. The eyes were the same, but the stillness behind them was heavier. "What happens if we don't choose?" he asked. The mirrors flickered. "Then the choice is made without you." Doors appeared between the mirrors. Identical, plain, unmarked. Each door emanated a subtle pressure, like gravity pulling inward. Not toward the exit, toward commitment. Beyoncé felt it immediately. One door felt lighter, easier. It promised continuity, control, the ability to move forward without interruption. Another door felt dense, difficult, honest. Jay-Z understood before either of them spoke. "These aren't exits," he said. "They're filters." Diddy placed his hand on a door that felt familiar, comfortable. It vibrated softly beneath his palm. "What does this one take?" he asked. "Memory," the voice replied. "Specifically how you remember this night." Beyoncé stood between two doors. Her breath slowed. She thought about interviews, about art, about how narratives were shaped not by truth but by repetition. She chose the heavier door. Jay-Z waited. Every door in the room resisted him equally. "I remember," he said. The mirrors went still. "That is noted," the voice replied. Diddy chose last. The door he touched opened instantly. One by one they stepped through. The mirrors vanished. The studio returned to normal. Lights fully on. No reflections delayed. No voices lingering. Only the screen remained active. The file labeled "Tomorrow" was gone, replaced by 3 new files. Each named, each time-stamped, each marked complete. Outside, the city was unchanged. Traffic moved. People laughed. Music played from open windows. But inside each of them, something had shifted. Not broken, not healed. Categorized, archived. And somewhere deep within the walls of the studio, something continued to listen. The next morning arrived without consequence. Sunlight filtered through the studio windows the same way it always had. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Assistants arrived. Schedules were checked. Doors opened when they were supposed to. Nothing appeared broken. That was the first lie. Diddy noticed it during a meeting later that day. He was mid-sentence when the room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Attentive quiet. Everyone was listening too closely, as if the space itself expected him to finish. A thought he hadn't consciously started. He did finish it. The words came out smoother than intended, more precise. The reaction was immediate, nods, agreement, momentum. Control had never been an issue for him, but now it felt reinforced. Beyoncé felt it during rehearsals. Her voice carried differently. Not louder, clearer. Engineers made fewer adjustments. Producers stopped interrupting. No one questioned direction. They called it confidence. She called it distance. Sometimes, when she held a note too long, she felt the room lean in. The same pressure she'd felt behind the glass that night. Listening, not admiring. Jay-Z noticed it last. He noticed it because something hadn't changed. At night, when the city finally quieted, he still remembered everything. The waveform, the countdown, the doors, the mirrors, the files. He remembered choosing not to forget. And he remembered the voice acknowledging it. That memory followed him everywhere. In the weeks that followed, patterns emerged across the industry. Artists with no clear breakout suddenly dominated charts. Projects shelved for years resurfaced flawlessly timed. Careers stabilized unnaturally fast, as if volatility itself had been edited out. Others vanished. Not publicly, not dramatically. Their social media went quiet. Their release dates dissolved. Their names were mentioned less often than not at all. It wasn't cancellation. It was omission. Beyoncé gave an interview 3 months later. The question was harmless. A routine inquiry about creative evolution. She paused longer than expected. The silence stretched. Cameras waited. "Sometimes," she said finally, "you don't lose inspiration. You just stop sharing where it came from." The clip went viral. Diddy stopped using digital recording entirely. Analog tape only. Physical reels. No backups. When asked why, he smiled and said he preferred texture. What he didn't say was that analog sound didn't respond. Jay-Z returned to the studio one night alone. The building was empty. Security waved him through without comment. Inside the control room, everything was exactly where it had been left. The console powered on automatically. A single file appeared on the screen. No date, no name, just a blinking cursor. Jay-Z didn't touch anything. I didn't choose your door, he said aloud. The speakers crackled softly. We know, the voice replied. What do you want now? He asked. To continue, it said. Jay-Z shook his head. I remember. A pause. Longer than before. That is inefficient, the voice said. The screen changed. Waveforms appeared. Hundreds of them. Thousands, each tagged with a name, a moment, a decision. Lives reduced to audio. You're not creating this, Jay-Z said. You're collecting it. Yes, the voice answered. Creation is unpredictable. Memory is reliable. Jay-Z leaned back in the chair, finally understanding. It's not about control, he said. It's about permanence. Correct. Outside, a siren passed. Somewhere, music played. Jay-Z stood up. You can keep recording, he said. But I won't help you shape it. The studio lights dimmed slightly. That choice has already been logged, the voice replied. Jay-Z left the building. The door closed behind him. It did not lock. Years passed. The studio was renovated. New equipment, new staff, new artists who had never heard of the old sessions. But sometimes, late at night, when no one was scheduled to record, the system activated itself. Waveforms appeared. No one pressed record. And somewhere, beneath the music, beneath the applause, beneath the carefully managed silence of success, a familiar presence remained. Listening, because some recordings are not made to be heard. They are made to be remembered. And some nights do not belong to the people who live them. They belong to what listens afterward.